Craig Berube is getting announced as the Leafs' new head coach today at 11. And we'll have it here on Sportsnet everywhere. Every possible outlet you can, .ca, 590, TV. You're going to see him. You're going to see him be announced and share his thoughts. And before he does that, let me do this. And I've got Kris Versteeg on the line, two-time Stanley Cup champion. Here's my thoughts leading into this. One is, it's kind of a weird day for a Leafs fan because I think that he was the unanimously popular choice among most, right? Given the real options. There seems to still be confusion over Quenneville and over Brind'Amour. I saw a lot of Leaf fans that were pretty upset in my mentions that were going, oh, why didn't they see how I was going to play with Brind'Amour? Man, that guy is like Hurricanes to the core.
Yeah.
He was never leaving Carolina. And the idea that you were going to put all your eggs into the basket of trying to pry him from there seemed like a pretty risky strategy given the depth of the field when it came to coaching. There was no secondary Craig Berube. Like, you had Todd McClellan. There were some other names that were in the mix, Gerard Gallant obviously being one of them. But if they had their guy and they identified their guy, I don't think that they wanted to sit there and wait. And then with Quenneville, he's not cleared. The NHL has yet to clear him to coach. And so for all the people that are kind of clamoring for those other two guys, they weren't options. So to me, this is where it starts. I think Berube is the best option out of all of the available guys. I've said it time and time again. He's a guy who won. And yes, I know there's lots of coaches who have won, right? Randy Carlyle won. That didn't really work out for the Leafs. Lots of coaches have won Stanley Cups. But I do think that for this organization right now, having that head coach who does have that pedigree, it does matter. But the thing that matters more to me is that he had such a long career as a player. He beat the brakes off the president of this organization. Like, he whooped Shanahan's ass in a fight. This guy has all the bona fides. You Google his hockeyfights.com page, and you will spend a lot of time there. You can spend a lot of time on his hockey reference page. He's known as accountable and as fair. I think that this group of players, when it comes to trying to set a new culture, which is something that I think we all agree is something that needs to happen with this hockey team, he has the best chance of impacting that. As a former player, as someone who's been around the game, as a lifer, as someone who, yes, has made all the sacrifices that a player has made and who has won it as a coach, those things to me matter probably more than anything. That being said, it does feel a little strange because nobody thinks that just a new coach with this roster is going to change anything. And so they're going to announce him today. He's going to stand up there. He's going to probably say some great things. The PR team has probably put together a great package. He probably interviewed incredibly well, and he probably had some really good insight on what he thinks this team needs. But when it comes to the tough questions that he's going to be asked today, like, what do you think should happen with Mitch Marner? He's going to have to plead the fifth. And everyone goes into the summer sort of waiting for the move that actually matters. And so I don't know if I can recall a time like this where a coach got announced for this franchise and so much needed to happen with the roster, or such a significant move still needed to happen with the roster. Anyways, Versteeg is here. What's up, buddy? How are we doing? Two-time Stanley Cup champion, inventor of the Clever app. Again, you can go to any app store and go download the Clever app. How are you doing today, brother?
Oh boy, you're going in the Sportsnet swear jar with the ass.
Ass is allowed. Ass.
I don't know anymore.
Ass is allowed. Ass is allowed.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, now did it too many times to. Now maybe I am in trouble. Maybe you got me in trouble now by pointing it out. Thanks. Trouble. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. No snitch. You just come on right away. You're just like, look what you did. Thanks. Yeah, right away. Okay, so let's just start with this. What do you think of the hire?
He's the best guy available. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's no doubt Quenneville is the best guy, but like you said, he's not available at the moment. And I like the time that they've hired Berube, too. I've heard a lot of analysts saying, why did they rush to this? Why did they do? I'm like, you have to hire your best option when it's available and give the coach enough time to settle in, learn the organization, learn what he likes within the organization, maybe the equipment staff or the training staff, and get to know the trainer and all that. Maybe he needs to add guys, stuff like that. So I've actually really liked the hire from a from what they need. Like you said, a guy of accountability. I've played for Chief before in Philadelphia. Obviously, he was the assistant coach there, but he is a high accountability guy. And I like the timeline that they're now giving him to get in, get settled, learn everything about the organization, and then maybe start to tweak things like his roster. Now you can go into free agency with your coach, with a guy maybe, hey, I need this type of guy for this line that's going to play this role. Go out and get me this guy. So I do really like the timing of it. Now, like you said, there is a roster construction piece that needs to happen to it. Mm-hmm. But overall, I have liked the timing and I'd like the hire.
Do you think, though, that someone like him would how do you think he would deal with having all these guys? If they run it back, if they don't remove the no-move clauses, right? Say Marner just says, yeah, I'm not doing it. And they're forced to run back the core four. What kind of impact do you think he can have on this group? Because that will be a big thing for everybody if it does happen, is what kind of change he can instill in them.
Well, I think he's going to make sure guys throughout the lineup feel important, and I think that's always been the biggest crutch of Keefe, is always going back to the well of playing 4 guys and, like we said in the playoffs, riding 5 guys on a power play. They didn't tweak anything on the power play. Riding the same guys time and time again. I think what Craig does really well is he makes everyone feel important within their role. If guys are in that role, he will play them. It won't be like, oh, we just brought this guy in and we might play him. He will play guys and make them feel important. So I think there's that piece that he can do, which will elevate other guys' games. Now, as for the stars, he's going to hold them more accountable in the details of the game. So just ask Jordan Kyrou at the end how much he liked Craig Berube. Didn't seem like very much, right? So that's a guy that's a high-skill player who has a lot of ability, who still lacks details in the game. And Craig called him out for it, and obviously he didn't like it. So not saying they didn't get along, but he's a guy that does need to be creative in order to create offense, which I also agree with. You do need to be creative. But if a guy like Marner is not going, or if he's creating turnovers at bad times of games and there's no puck management, Craig will definitely let him know. And I don't think Craig's also a guy who's scared to push guys lower in the lineup to create depth within the lineup. So if they roll it back, I think you're going to see that type of tweak. You're going to see guys held more accountable. Maybe guys sit at times, or maybe they don't get put in situations like a power play. Maybe they miss a couple power plays. So that's stuff that I think Craig would do and instill if they ran it back.
When you say that, though, if I'm just like, if we're doing, if I'm doing the role of Mitch Marner right now and you just had that answer and I was in a contract year, I'd be going, I feel like that makes me want to be here less.
Well, and like you said, with all the scrutiny from the media, do they really want me here? Is there a better situation where I can get 8 years on my contract? If I take it to free agency now, is it 7? I think the best situation right now is for them to explore, obviously, a trade. If that's what he wants, is max dollar amount and max years. If he doesn't and he wants to stay in Toronto, I've always said, if Marner becomes that secondary guy, he can still play with the top guys, but a secondary paid guy within the lineup, I'm not against keeping him. But like you said, or like we've all known, he wants 12, 13 million. That's where you can't keep him. So if you're Mitch and you're looking at the entire landscape of what's going on, Craig's coming in, how's the team feel about me? There's a lot for him to intake with this information and then make a decision.
Yeah, I just think if you're talking about a hard-ass coach who's going to be there trying to shift the culture and trying to make guys more accountable and who is willing to move you down the lineup or take you off a power play or really try to, impact the feeling of this is a group, not a collection of 5 individuals who are extremely well paid at the very, very top. And again, I think the Leafs are going to end up next season having 4 of the biggest 10 contracts in all of hockey. So it's always hard for them to kind of change that culturally when that's just right there at the top, sitting and staring everybody in the face. But if you do have someone that's coming in and trying to do that, do you think that coaches and do you think he is a guy? Because we've mentioned and you've talked to me about Laviolette, right? How he comes in and he's an awesome head coach, but there is a shelf life because things can kind of burn out. Do you worry with a hire like this that a guy comes in and right away he tries to make an impact by being a disciplinarian, like too hard in one direction, and can that lose a group of guys right out of the gate?
Yeah, I think when coaches come in, so I do think there is a shelf life for Berube. Yeah. I definitely do think that. Now, I'm interested to see if Craig comes into this situation. It's the biggest, it's obviously one of the biggest markets in the world, if not the. Are you still going to be true to yourself, or are you coming into this press conference saying, I'm going to hold everyone accountable, and then, like you said, you come in gunslinging, and then all of a sudden by February everyone hates you, right? So I think if Craig just comes in and he truly just bees himself, he's a great guy. Like, he truly is a great guy. He is a player's coach in a sense of being able to communicate with. He's just going to tell you straight up, though, right? So I just think if he comes in and he bees himself, and what he does really well is, like, coaches like Quenneville and Berube and all those top coaches, they're not always the X's and O's guys. They do have a certain structure and a time. Like, there's just a big piece and emphasis they put on time management, and player time, who's going out in what situation. I remember we talked about in the playoffs, so I'm kind of getting off track, but
go.
We talked about, why is Keefe not double stacking a center with 13 seconds left at the end of game 2, I think it was, when they had Tavares with Marner and I think it was Nyes out. Like, just those are situations you're going to see where Berube has 2 centermen out. He has 2 of the best guys, the best defensive guys, doesn't even care who's on the bench. He's putting his best 3 guys out to kill the 13 seconds, even in a regular season game. So those are things that coaches like Berube, Quenneville, all these top coaches do, but they also pin guys against each other for internal competition. So if guys are going in the lineup, he will elevate them when they're going, I believe, and then he'll bring them back down to where they are if another guy's elevated their game. And that's what I didn't see enough from Keefe at times. If a guy, we talked about 5 years ago, Spezza's going, but he'd keep him at 11 minutes, 11 minutes. I'm like, this guy's your best player in the playoffs right now. Elevate him. So that's what these best coaches do, is they're constantly gambling. They're always seeing who's going, who's not, elevating guys, pinning guys against each other for internal competition, which sometimes pisses guys off. Hey, I played in those where I have 5-game point streak. I'm feeling good. All of a sudden, the first shift of the game, I'm crap. Boom, I'm on the 3rd line. I'm on the 4th line. Like, what's going on? But then they elevate Brian Bickle, and boom, he scores. Or they put Patrick Sharp. Again, I know there's better personnel there around at times, but the internal competition that these coaches create is another piece that I think you could look for. That is something that, Craig has in his arsenal that he could do. If Marner's not going, if Willie's not going, maybe he elevates another guy that he likes within the lineup to that role, and he downplays them to make sure they earn that spot back.
That's the one thing, by the way, I've been waiting and meaning to address with you, is when you've talked about some of this stuff in the past, I've gone, yeah, man, look at what team you had in Chicago and some of the other guys, and you're always like, play Spezza more. It's like, yeah, man, he's 40 years old, right? Like, it's like you have 40-year-old Jason Spezza, and they've got like Pierre
Michael
Engvall.
Handzus, though.
Sure.
Michael Handzus.
Sure. I'm just
he was
saying.
40 and he wasn't good.
Sure.
And I'm not. I know the personnel piece was higher if you look depth in the lineup.
It's not even close. It's not even. It's not even deeper. It's like not comparable. Like it's
way
don't even
deeper. You bring guys in all the time, and you just don't play them to their strengths. And
sure.
I was texting you about the Oilers. You bring guys in, you don't put Henrik ever at center. You put him on the wing. He's a centerman.
Yeah.
And then you put Carrick. You don't even play him in the lineup. And then you put Derek Ryan there. It's just like put the guys in the situation that you bring them in for.
Yeah.
And put them in their strengths and do create internal competition. You're right. The roster construction is a disaster due to salary cap here, which doesn't let you get enough depth in your lineup. Plain and simple.
Yeah.
But it is up to the coach to figure out who's going to challenge guys and to create that internal competition.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's a lot more difficult when you're saying, well, Nick Robertson's going. And you're like, yeah, for sure. But also, if he gets stuck out in the D zone, there's going to be a puck in the back of our net, right? And so you try to find your spots, you try to pick your spots, but it's tough.
But I also think Craig isn't scared to find other guys in the minors.
Yeah.
And I remember Avery came on one time, and he was like, is there anyone in the minors that the Leafs can go out and get? Like, where's their scouting staff here? And just to fill a role that Craig needs done. Is there, not even saying with the Marlies, is there anyone in free agency that fills a role that you guys might not think in the media is the best looking option that fills a role? And I think that Craig's not scared to bring guys in to put them in an elevated role, to see if they have it, to see if they're willing to do that better than whoever's in the lineup at whatever dollar amount. So, yeah, if you're looking at the entirety, these are the types of coaches that will find guys that just fill the need for what they need. Now, again, each coach has to coach each roster with different roster construction to their strength, but I still think with what they're good at, they have to bring to the table and try to maximize it. So that's, like you said, create internal competition, create an accountability culture, and then everything else around that will fall into place.
Yeah, see, I believe in his attempt to try to do this, but this gets back to why today is such a challenge for people as you go, unless Marner waives that, you're still showing up with that chunk allocated to the cap. And we can say all you want about, internal competition or try to make that happen. And even listening to you talk about it, it makes me so frustrated looking back on some of these years where they've tried to gamble this core over and over and over again. And even for somebody like Shanahan to try to do this over and over and over again, when you go, how can you ever tell someone like Bobby McMahon that there's real internal competition for like a spot up the lineup, right? When you have those guys making that money. Like, of course, Sheldon Keefe is getting in trouble or getting fired or is not going to, risk his job running some of these other guys out there. He's like, he knows those are the guys that need to play. You got to play the $11 million players.
And so, coach too,
for sure.
Right?
And like I want to get into the Oilers series with you in a second, but I think that's kind of the similar thing with Knoblauch right now is like, you're learning on the job. This is tough when you've got Connor McDavid in his prime and you're trying to win a Stanley Cup and you've got a rookie head coach who had to come in and learn on the fly. It's like, yeah, who really is coaching this thing and what exactly are you doing? But yeah, I think that you've got internal competition throughout the lineup for some of these spots, but the actual internal competition is just like who gets to play with those guys, right? Who gets the privilege of playing with those guys?
That's an entitlement.
Yeah. And I just don't know how you break that without removing a guy from the roster. Like, even if Berube comes in here and he's being a hard ass and he's like moving Marner down the lineup at some spots, are you really going to go into a playoff matchup per se or a must-win game when it comes to the standings and the chips are going to be down and keep him off of power play 1 or limit his ice time and not have the guy play 20 minutes so that you're bumping up, like, again, a Robertson or a Yarncroc? I don't see it. Like, I don't know how it's even possible. So it's like, yeah, you got to have the roster shuffle. Otherwise, it just feels like shuffling the deck chairs, even bringing in this coach.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it is going to be an uphill battle for Craig. Mm-hmm. I do think there's a lot of positives he can add. I still don't know if this is a Stanley Cup winning team, though, like you said. So if you look at the whole lineup, I don't know if it's a Stanley Cup winning team. I do think there's coaches like Craig, like Q, like these other guys. If he was brought in 3, 4, 5 years ago, I do think you could have won more rounds with different coaches giving their way, I guess, the way they coach in order to maximize the current roster they have. Because I do still think there's enough. I mean, like you said, you've won 1 round in 8 years, right? You definitely have had enough to win more rounds. Now, to win a Stanley Cup, that's yet to be seen. I know that is the one thing Kelly talked about, or Pelly or Kelly? What's the guy? Pelly.
Yeah.
I know that's the one thing he talked about, and they all talked about is winning at all costs, and I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But constructing the right roster in order to make it happen is still, it's still on the table. Do they have the guys? Or, like you said, they got to get rid of someone. They got to bring in other players. They got to fill out the depth roles, and that's the best way forward. Is he going to waive? I have no idea, but it's the best way forward.
Listen, this is, I know I want to stick to the coach, and I do want to look at more of the positives, and I definitely want to hear about your experience with Berube a little bit more, but I got to say, just as we're talking this out, I think one of the big mistakes of the Dubas era and the core 4 and the we can and we will and we'll just pay all these guys is they thought that they were going to be able to identify dudes down the lineup that were going to provide that depth year over year, right? They thought that part of the equation was going to be easier than it actually was. And I don't know if expansion hurt them, right? Because people always talk about the pandemic and the flattening of the cap, but never any like, hey, 2 teams were added. And so the talent ended up getting diluted to a certain degree. But they thought they were going to be able to nail these guys down. And some of them, came in and got careers, right? Mikheyev is a good player, although he's got, stone hands. Or Engvall was great at holding on to the puck and skating towards his own net, right? Like they found guys that were amazing at certain things, but never really hit on a bunch of depth players that ended up actually working out for them. They'd have a guy.
They also let a lot of guys go.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Was it Joshua? Was he not here?
Yeah, he was, but somebody told me recently that he never wanted to be here. Like he wanted out the second they drafted him or something. I don't know what the details are, but that wasn't up to them because they traded him for future picks or something or future considerations. And I went, I never heard what those considerations were.
You handed your organization to a 35-year-old at the time.
Yeah.
In its most important years with a rookie coach that didn't identify hockey players, that they identified data. That was it. That was what they ran on in those early years until Dubas started to realize, I need actual hockey players to play hockey in big moments and big games. And they let all these young guys go. They let a bunch of these young guys go, these bigger guys that could do more. And you handed the keys to the kingdom in the most important years to a young guy that also didn't get good contracts to help create more depth for the team. And then you had a scouting staff or whoever was put in place that let these guys go. Like you had some young pieces here that you just, who was Marchment traded for what? I don't even know.
He was traded for not Nick Patan, but one of the Dennis Malgin.
Yeah. So, and then all of a sudden midway through Dubas is,
kind of.
Midway through his term, all of a sudden he starts to try to bring in a Clifford or, he tries to try to bring in other guys because he's like, well, we're getting bullied around or we're just a puck possession. So, this should have been done 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
That's the painful part.
Yes.
But this is kind of what I'm saying is listen, what we're driving at here too is on the day there's a new head coach being hired, people like you and I are having this conversation because this is still the conversation that most people are having. Like, I'm interested in seeing what Berube does. You said it. You think he's the best coaching, that he was the best hire available. I agree with you. Look what happened last year with the Leafs, right? I think part of the reason Sheldon Keefe, I think there's two reasons why he got that extension. One is that they needed to try to basically show some stability within an organization that was having some crumbling from up top. Like there were Dubas people in the building, there were Shanahan people in the building. They needed a show of unity, and what better way than getting, Dubas's coach on board to buy in with this group. Okay, got it. But two was that they had to hire the general manager. They were behind the eight ball. All of the coaches ended up getting picked up, and you were at a point where you're going, well, who do you want to hire now? And you're right. If Berube was the guy, you had to move on it. You couldn't wait. You couldn't get cute with this, and then all of a sudden he ends up somewhere else, and you're making your backup hire. You're the Toronto Maple Leafs. You got the most money. You should have the biggest allure. You should be getting the guy that you want. And again, you've gone over a bunch of the reasons why you think he is the right hire. It's just very difficult right now because he is entering a situation that is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly difficult. Like he's got a power structure at the top that seems unsettled, at least. Like at the very, very least, when it comes to the president that is hiring you today, you've got a roster that even if you have an opinion on it, you don't know how much you're going to be able to shape it. You're going to be entering limited cap space, a culture that has been set here for the last decade, essentially, that you're going to be trying to break up. And the pressure to try to come in here and enact change without rocking the boat too much. Like, it's a lot. It is a lot for this guy to step into. I want to go back, though, to your time in Philly. And I know you weren't there for a long time. Like, would you play there? Half a season?
Yeah, just a playoff run.
Yeah, okay, yeah. But you were there for a playoff run, so you were there with him through some meaningful games. When you said that, he was an accountability guy, can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, just, he was the assistant coach.
Yep.
So there, and Lavi was the alpha in the room. So, and Craig knew where he stood, but he was just a guy that would come up and talk to you and, talk to you about wall plays. Hey, Steger, what are you good at on the wall? And I'd be like, well, I get the puck and, that first little chip pass. He goes, well, why are you not doing that? If you want more ice, you need to get back to what you do well. So little outlet passes on the wall, because I was a player that prided myself on a lot of little plays or wall plays in the D zone that freed up my centerman or freed up my D, right? So, and when I first got to Philly, that's, I was also nervous. I got brought into a new team and there was high expectations. We were supposed to win a Stanley Cup. So I played nervous, but then, he comes and he talks to me and he goes, if you're not going to be doing what you're good at, you just won't play. I know Lavi, So it's not to say that was an accountability. It was just a conversation from an assistant coach that knew what I did well. And he's like, don't always just focus on just scoring the goal. Focus on all the little plays that add up to big ones. So that was just a piece and a conversation that I remember having with Craig. I also remember going out and, I ate at the same Italian restaurant and he would be there and we just have conversation, and he was just a good guy to talk to. But that was Craig as an assistant coach. I've never played for him as a head coach. When you're a head coach, there's a different mentality you got to have. There's a different fear you got to strike within your players. So I just thought Craig was a great guy at talking to me, and there was no gray zone. It was black and white about what Lavi wanted. And I feel that that's a piece that he could add as a head coach. Just don't let guys live in the gray zone. Make them understand their roles. Make them understand, little wins all over the ice, not big wins that hopefully add up to big wins at the end. So like I said, little plays out of the D zone that end up being in a goal. Maybe you don't get an assist or a goal on that play, but it builds your confidence. And I always felt that guys like Craig really focus on the small details that add up to big things and not always the home run.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, from everything that you're lining out, it sounds like, hey, this guy is honest. He's very details-oriented, but he's not Mr. X's and O's that's going to be going out there and then poring over the tape and trying to figure out, how to reinvent or break the atom, split the atom.
Yeah, when we're talking details, too, like when you talk to some people, they think it's X's and O's. Oh, the 1-2-2 neutral zone or the 3. And no, it's the details of situational awareness. It's the details of winning faceoffs, wall plays. It's time, like puck management. How many times have we seen John Tavares when we talk about it over the last 5 years? I'm like, John, it's a minute left in the period. Stop throwing backhand sauce through the middle. Just get it in. Just those are little details that always add up to wins at the end of the day. And those are things I think he's really going to harp on. Time management, puck management, where you are in the game, guys on the ice, who's going, and like I said, the internal competition. Now, you do have a valid argument. Who are the guys that are going to internally compete? Yet to be seen. But I think that that's a good building block of where the guys can start to understand what he likes and what's going to make this team win. Yeah.
It's always internal competition for the final 6 roster spots, right? I think on Kipper and Bourne, Sammy and Justin called them, the others. It's like, it's just the others. It's like there's the core.
Yeah, but you don't want those guys to feel like that.
No, of course not. Others, I've been pointing this out for years, dude. I've been talking about this year over year over year. I'm like, I don't understand how, even going into this season, I think Tree did a damn good job, all things considered. Like, people can nitpick with things and go, well, why'd they do this? And he gave too much to Klingberg. And I go, yeah, that wasn't a good contract. Like, obviously it wasn't a good contract. But this guy walked in the middle of the offseason, essentially, couldn't be at the first round of the draft, and had to piece together a bunch of mercenary players. And I went, this is pretty good. You got all these guys and you kept some flexibility. Fine. But I never understood how you were going to be able to get a crazy amount of buy-in from players when they're on 1-year deals. And then, like you mentioned, if you are trying to make that competition for the Domies and the Bertuzzis, and I guess it kind of did work later in the season, but how are those guys going to be okay when they're the ones that are bumped down or they're not getting their role the way that you talked about? And Domi's saying, I'm here on a $3 million ticket. Like, eventually I've got to showcase what I can do. And he did. And now that's probably what earned him some money. And then all of a sudden, guess what? That was when the Leafs started to look their best, was when they got other guys involved. But those other guys did have talent. And now they've got to replace some of those roles. They've got to fill some of those other spots. And it's just not going to be as easy to do if they run all these guys back. Okay, last thing on him, though, because it sounds like I want to try to read between the lines on some of this stuff. You're saying he was honest, he was fair, you had good conversations, easy guy to talk to, attention to details, understood the game, had your respect, but he didn't have to be the ultimate, carried the stick guy and gave you the stick guy, because he always had Laviolette up top, and he could basically be like, he's the one who's going to bench you. Like, he's the mean bad guy. I'm not the mean bad guy. Now he's got to be the bad guy. And that's the question from, and he's done it in St. Louis, but that's going to be the question here is, how does he do that over his tenure?
Well, like I said, I think he's just going to be honest to who he is, and he cannot come in here and be someone he's not. And truly, Craig is a guy that is just going to come in here, I believe, and be himself. So we go back to the entirety of everything we've talked about. The honesty, the accountability. He is definitely a guy that will talk to guys and be straight up. If he doesn't like what they're doing, he'll tell them. So does that add up to a Stanley Cup? I have no idea with this roster. But if he comes in here and he truly be himself and tries to be and not be someone he's not, I think it could bode well for the team, the culture, and what they're trying to build ultimately. And that's trying to, probably get out of the first round.
Yeah, probably get out of the first round would be good. Okay, here's my last one on him. Again, you played fairly recently. You've played with a lot of these young guys in the league, and I know that you haven't played with all these young Maple Leafs, but how do you think that coaches like him are going to work in today's day and age? Like, as the league gets younger and younger, because you mentioned it, you would have honest and frank conversations with a guy like Berube, and you had a coach like Laviolette who you loved, and you loved playing for a hard ass like that. But do you think that works the same way now? Because, yeah, you were coached very differently than the way that guys are getting you are actively involved, again, through Clever, your academy. Like, you see the way the game has shifted. You see the way that it's being developed differently. A guy like that coming in here, how does that work as the team gets younger?
In today's game, I think, who was it, Pete DeBoer, who gave that great quote about did you hear the Pete DeBoer quote?
I don't think so.
You gotta pull it up and read it. It's very true. These coaches, I think, these older coaches, you're starting to see them come back because the pendulum swung so far one way.
For sure.
And I played for a coach like Glenn Gulletson, who was the pendulum swinging far way. Great guy, nice guy, was scared to make change, though, in big moments, was scared to do big things in big moments, was scared to pull the goalie or change goalies or change the roster and stuff like that, and was really on the just player side where you needed some of that other piece. So I think what you are seeing is the better teams bringing in these older coaches who've definitely become more accustomed to giving younger guys more opportunities. So look at Pete DeBoer. He brings in Stankoven. Stankoven's earning his minutes at times, but then he doesn't play at other times, right? So I think you have to find a balance, especially with the new athlete. You have to be willing to talk to them a little bit more, not just like, hey, you're crap, sit down. Hey, you're crap, this is why you're sitting down. So there has to be more conversation, and I think Craig can do that, and Craig will do that. But there still needs to be that little bit of fear in the back of your mind. If you are not playing well, you can get demoted in the lineup. And I've said this before, when I came in the league, and even before me, a lot of guys can talk to this, you started on the fourth line. You worked your way up. After it didn't go well, you go back down the lineup. Nowadays, the kids come into the lineup I'm a power play guy, okay? Now, if they get their power play, but they're not doing well, and if they ever get demoted in the lineup, they don't know how to deal with the adversity because there's been so much entitlement over time. So it's hard for them to deal with the adversity to work their way back up, or you'll see the new player coach who just leaves that young guy in that situation all year, and he just swims uphill, and then their team stinks, and nothing changes. So I do think that the athlete is different. They need more answers. They're allowed to ask for more. They're allowed to ask more questions. Where back in the day, there was no question. It was just you walk in and you were told, and you're like, all right, well, on to the next day. They definitely need to understand the why more. I think the old hard-ass coaches, I'm going to the swear jar here, but the old hard-ass coaches from back in the day have had to add that to their repertoire, the why. They have to answer more questions. But I do still think that there needs to be a level of accountability to crush the entitlement of the young players, that they just think they should be handed all these things.
Yeah, I think all of that is really insightful and also fair, but it also did make me laugh thinking about Torts because he still refuses to do the why.
Yeah,
he's up there, he's twitching. He's like, I'm never gonna do the why. So he's like, I'll never why this out with you. I decide, and that's the way I want it to be. It's just so great.
He ain't whying.
No, he's never gonna why. You're never getting a why out of him. Okay, so before you go, we do need to talk about this Oilers game a little bit. All right, so Game 7 Hams, I'm stoked. It's the two Canadian teams. This is my feel about the Oilers. Man, they can turn it on, right? They dominated Vancouver in so much of this series. So much of that series was just Edmonton controlling the play and looking great. And then there's one turnover, right? They have one moment where it's a mistake. And all of a sudden, and credit to Vancouver, because that team had guts. You could just never write them off. How many times in this series were they just like, oh my God, you gave us a window? Maybe it was kind of a perfect matchup in the sense of a team that really struggled to defend leads versus a team that was just so hungry and would turn it up the second that they could put pressure on you. Although after they scored the second goal, they didn't get a shot on net and the final five, which sort of sucked, took out a little bit of the climactic element of the game. But yeah, how concerning is it to you for Edmonton moving forward here? Because I think the assumption that I and a lot of people are making is that they're going to get thumped by this Stars team. Like if you're doing that against the Canucks, who didn't even have Besser last night and who had their backup, third string goaltender in net, and they didn't get anything from their two franchise players, just completely no-showed. Like Connor Garland was their most important player. JT Miller was their most important player. Like, what is it going to look like against Dallas? Do you think it can change?
Back to the coaching.
Yeah.
I picked Edmonton to win the Stanley Cup. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change.
Should be noted to the audience that you are from Alberta, but anyways, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a little bit of a home.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A little bit. Anyways, Dallas, after watching them in the first two rounds, is clearly the most well-oiled machine. Pete's got every single guy on that team bought into their role, bought into their minutes. Rupe Hintz has still been crap, but that's a here nor there. If he could ever elevate, that's where that team becomes even on a whole other level. But when you're looking at Edmonton, I don't know what's wrong with Henrique. He's probably got a high ankle sprain or something, it kind of sounds like. But you need to just make sure you're playing all your players that you brought in at their roles. Because everyone talks about their depth isn't that good. Their depth, I think, is actually good. Although I would never let Warren Foegele throw a backhand pass again in my life on the ice, because it's just pizza day when he puts it on his backhand. But they actually do have guys that when they're set into their roles and they get ice time and they feel important, they do well. When the Edmonton Oilers were getting in trouble, especially early on in the playoffs, it was the Maple Leaf syndrome. Let's just put McDavid and Draisaitl in this unit on for 2 minutes on the power play, which, hey, leave McDavid on, sure. But you still got to get your secondary guys in the game, and that's going to be the most important thing for the Edmonton Oilers going into this series. Even more important, I think, than goaltending, because I still think Skinner's average and Chet Pickard, like, they're still not great goalies, and I don't think you can ever – it's kind of like an Adin Hill. I do think Adin Hill's better, but I don't think you're ever just going to get outlandish goaltending from Edmonton. So where the importance needs to lie within the Oilers is getting your secondary offensive guys into the game, getting your role guys bought into what they have to do. Warren Foegele, you are a third liner and you are killing clock, or a fourth liner. Stop throwing backhand passes in your own zone. Make sure your guys are wired in. Make sure they feel important and get them in the game. Otherwise, Dallas is going to crush you with their depth, because they have a third line with Sagan and all these guys that can still score. They put it in your net. They can defend. So if they don't get their bottom guys into the game, Edmonton's going to get crushed. I still think, though, they do have these superstars that make everyone uneasy at any given time, and Connor didn't have the best last series. And if he has his game going in this series, makes them much more dangerous. But they're going to have to spread the talent out throughout the lineup. They're going to have to make everyone feel important. And if that happens, it's going to be a long series.
I got to tell you, I think there's only one path, and that's the superstars dominate and they play all the games. Like they play all the minutes. I don't buy the depth. I think that their decor is so shaky, and I don't trust Skinner in a big spot whatsoever. Like, I think that part of the reason that they melt down when there's a mistake and that they've blown these leads is that they tighten up in front of those goalies, and they're like, holy crap. Also, as the game goes on, some of their stars, I think, start to tire a bit. You saw Edmonton.
They tire and they don't defend well. Yeah. Like McDavid, even in the first period, he's flying the zone, and then they get 2 or 3 good looks. And then in the D zone, he loses that face-off on the second goal. He's tired, right? And then they lose their details in the D zone. Although Draisaitl made a couple 6-stick plays, he took away that net front pass and then the cross ice seam all in one. I think it was 2 minutes left. But you need to keep those guys fresh so they can defend, because they're going to be defending a lot against Dallas.
So last one, and this is a Vancouver one. How do you think? So again, credit to them. No one saw them going this far. They had this incredible turnaround to have this run. their fan base has to be somewhat excited, especially since like you did this without Demko and you lost Besser, who was a beast for them in the postseason. But how would you be feeling as a teammate of Pettersson and Hughes after you watched those guys play the way they did in the regular season, and then you saw those performances in the playoffs? And like I will say, Hughes gets a little lumped in unfairly, but he was their MVP and he was their most important guy, and he wasn't the same in the postseason either. Like Pettersson ate all the criticism, but I thought Hughes was closer to him than people put it out there.
Yeah, I went actually and looked at their total playoff numbers. Like their total playoff numbers since they've been playing, they've both been close to a point a game. I think they're 6 to 8 points under a point a game. That's not superstar-like, which you would expect from those two, but it's not terrible.
Sure.
So they have been finding ways to produce in the playoffs. They also get a lot of power play time, so that could be a piece of it.
Big time.
The thing with Pettersson that for me bothers me is just his attitude and mentality. You watch that press conference, they're asking questions, and it looks like he's going to cry.
It's good question.
Yeah, and here's the thing, like I watched JT Miller, and this is what we've asked for from the Leafs. This is what we asked for. I didn't block my shot. I wasn't good enough. Even though it wasn't, like I watched the whole play, it wasn't entirely his fault, but he owned it. And he was pissed off, like that's something that Pettersson's going to need to mature on is, not get so down on yourself, man. And don't think the world's against you when they're asking you these questions. Just own it. Be happy on the stage. Show good body language. Body language is everything. Your teammates probably watched that interview and they're like, "Oh God, our superstar is acting like this. Like, how does that make you feel?" You know what I mean? Like that is something first and foremost. Besides on ice play or whatever you need from him, that would be the focal point for Elias Pettersson. For Quinn Hughes, he's an undersized D-man. I've always said when they lost Tanev, that was a huge loss to him. They had to find a new D-man that can defend, which was Hronek, and they finally got him, and that could move the puck as well to help him, because if you watch down low, Hughes is getting owned a lot on those 1v1 situations, so he's just not big enough to hold a big guy against the wall or pin him. So when they go to man almost in that D zone for Vancouver, Hughes is in trouble. That's why that when they can kind of swarm and do a little bit of zone, it helps smaller D-men. But offensively, he was getting tired because I thought he was getting so worked in his own zone at times. Like the Oilers had the puck in their zone a lot. They were moving around. Hughes, again, isn't a big enough guy just to pick up a Fogle or a McDavid or someone and throw him against the wall. He's exerting a lot of energy on the D side, and he's playing a lot of minutes. So you got to think he's also somewhat managing his energy. He's like, man, if I'm trying to pin guys and hit guys and do all this, I'm going to be toast by the 28-minute mark because he's playing 28, 30 minutes a game. So I think he was overused in a lot of D situations, which didn't let him go on to offense. And then he didn't really produce on the offensive side at the same clip. But that's the way I was looking at Hughes.
Yeah, and again, you're right. He did have 10 points in the postseason. Pettersson, not nearly as many. Pettersson, only 6 in 13 games. Just wasn't the same guy. And 5 of those assists, right? Hughes, didn't score a goal, and half of his assists came on the power play. So it's like, okay, yeah, fine. And he's a power play guy, and power play matters. Just ask Leaf fans. They would have taken some of those, but... Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting offseason for these guys. And, Hughes
is a guy you have to use properly, though. I've always thought he's not a high-end defender. He needs a proper partner. He needs to be placed on the ice and not saying he can't be on at the end of games, but just find him more situations that lessen the load in the D zone. Duncan Keith was a bit bigger of a D-man, but he was the best defender. He wasn't as a high offensive octane guy like Hughes, but he was a similar smaller D-man that just defended at a much higher rate because his work rate was higher in the D zone. But Hughes, on the other hand, you could use more in those other offensive situations that I think would allow him to not defend as much if you need him to create offense all the time.
Hey, buddy, we got to run. But, good stuff as always. And then, we'll be talking to you, obviously, as we get closer and closer to the Stanley Cup final. Kris Versteeg, 2-time Stanley Cup champ, creator of the Clever app.